program. My TL, Ian, is not here, unfortunately, due to the law of conservation of Sydney, Mass. He had to go to Sydney so all the Sydney folks could come here. So he's off watching some of his friends get married. So he left me to do all of this, which means, one, I had no one saying there's nothing concrete here. It's all PME strategy stuff. Get ready. And two, no one was reading this and saying, hey, have you practiced? Have you done anything? So I wrote this deck a week ago and haven't looked at it since. So this is going to be fun for all of us as I explore my old thoughts. All right. So what is ergonomics? Ergonomics is all of the future-looking web platform language features, which if you're like me or pretty much anyone I give this description to, that's a little confusing. It's hard to tell exactly what does that scope mean. So my primary goal in this talk, in fact, probably the only goal I really have, is to give a better understanding of what ergonomics means, what it is, what it isn't, and how it overlaps with the other programs. It's also a relatively new program, so that's about all we're prepared to say yet. So first, another way of looking at it is that ergonomics is changing how you code for the web, not what you code for the web. So think of it this way. If a user wouldn't notice the change in a developer adopting the API you worked on, it's probably something ergonomics related. So if you think about things like Houdini or promises, any of these features where it's not really changing much except for developer productivity, that's an ergonomics feature. But something like push notifications or Bluetooth, web USB, any of these are something that a user would notice. So these are more capabilities features. So that's from the capabilities program we talked about before. Another way of looking at it is anything that feels like the extensible web. So when we're trying to find new primitives that help to define larger services, UX features that developers are trying to build and expose them at low-level ways so they can build what they need, recombine them in ways they want. So again, these are things like promises, where it's a new paradigm, but it's just going to be used kind of throughout the platform, used in many ways, very flexible. We also want to make sure that we're helping to find, prioritize, and implement any good ideas that have come from frameworks. So things like jQuery have contributed a lot to the platform, right? They had a lot of great ideas. And so we want to make sure that, like the extensible web says, we want people to be building libraries, building frameworks, but we don't want you to have to always be paying that cost over the network, over startup. We want to be baking ideas once we've really proved to ourselves that they're good ideas into the web platform. So looking to frameworks for guidance is one thing that ergonomics will really be focusing on. And if you're working on a feature that's coming from a framework, that's also probably an ergonomics feature. We're also trying to change the web platform programming model. So this encompasses things like WebAssembly, where we're going to see a big shift in how people build for the web, what they target, what kind of experiences are enabled. So not necessarily adding new features, but making it possible to do things that maybe weren't performant before or something like that. So if you're doing something where it's going to kind of change how people think about architecting their web app, or if it's going to lead to sort of new best practices coming in from CS or something like that. For example, anything that would support functional programming or one-way data flows, which are really hot right now, those would be also ergonomics. So to check if you guys are paying attention, because I know this is the last update, I saw a lot of heads just shoot up when I said that. That was really enjoyable. I've got a short quiz. We're going to go by show of hands, see if you were listening. Also, just to kind of demonstrate that this problem is hard, defining what is and isn't ergonomics. And at the end of the day, the answer is, don't panic. We'll work it out together. Just email anyone you think might be involved, and we'll figure out what is and isn't. But just so we're going to go through a few. So let's start easy. Web components. Raise your hand if you think, wow, hand already up. Raise your hand if you think this is an ergonomics feature. All right, yeah, I would say it is as well. Again, people might disagree, but it seems about right. How about push notifications? Raise your hand if you think this is an ergonomics feature. Nice. I also sort of spoiled that one, so that was one of the listening checks. Okay, how about the long task API? For those of you who may not know, the long task API notifies the developer when they've had a task that's run for a long period of time. Ergonomics, yes, no? Interesting. So this is one of those blurry lines. Yes, sort of. It's going to change how people measure performance, but you're probably better off talking with the speed program about this, because this is one of those things where the line is blurry, but at the end of the day, it's more about how fast are things performing. And so again, you could email both and that would be fine, but speed program, probably a good contact here. All right, this one is my favorite one. Service worker, ergonomics. Yes, no, okay. I probably fall in the same camp. Service worker is a really hard one because it does change how you code for the web, right? You're going to start serving things through service worker, moving functions there. But at the end of the day, it's really about adding user visible capabilities, improving loading performance, giving offline, enabling push notifications. So it's probably safe, as many of your intuitions said here, that this is a capabilities feature, not necessarily ergonomics. Though again, if you wanted to see CS, I always love more email. Okay, web VR. Is it ergonomics? Is it not? No one. Oh, exciting. Okay, I would actually categorize this one as ergonomics. So the reason I say this, it is adding a new capability, yes, but the capability itself is already fairly well designed, right? We know what WebVR is based on the native platforms that are already offering it, and so we're more just trying to enable that. The bigger question is, how do we take the sort of wild, true polling loop model that most VR games use and turn that into something that works more with the event-driven model of the web? So this is more of a programming model question. So actually, Ergonomics has been tracking this one and working on it over the last few months. So you would be forgiven if this did not seem obvious, because it's not obvious. This just emphasizes the fact that it's all about including all of the right people and making sure we come to a general consensus on who's going to track or who's going to do what. Okay. So that's what ergonomics features may or may not be. I have a doc that I can send out on more thoughts about what is and isn't. I'll send it out afterwards. But I also want to take a minute to get you guys excited about ergonomics. So imagine this beautiful utopian world where it's both daytime and nighttime, and things are flying through and everyone is happy and standing on beautiful hills and things like that. I want to paint a picture of what a world where ergonomics has been successful looks like. Okay, so in a perfect world, I'm going to read a little bit of this out, but we know sustainably and reliably what the biggest web developer problems are and where the web platform is falling down. So we don't rely on people publishing long diatribes on Medium or something like that about how the web is dead or the web is missing this or wouldn't it just be better. We detect those things at scale beforehand, and we've started working on them. So when someone says, hey, this is kind of annoying, we say, oh, don't worry, that's coming out in 2 months. We can also look at different API designs. So two teams could have different opinions on how something should be built. And instead of it being sort of just a battle of wills between the two, we can look at them, have a concrete set of principles we're looking at and say, it seems like there's a trade-off, obviously, but design A seems a little better. We also will have really easy coordination across teams. So if you're working on a feature that spans team code bases or team feature areas, it'll be easy to stay in touch, design things scalably across the two. An example of this is the async append API that's been tossed around here and there. Kind of touches on all of the different rendering teams, style, layout, paint, DOM teams. It's kind of all over the place. Hopefully the ergonomics team or ergonomics program will make it easier for folks to coordinate with one another and drive progress, even though ownership is sort of shared. Also, we want to make it so that if you're new to API design for the web, this isn't a monumental task to design your first API. We want to make sure that people are getting it right on their first try and that it's not a scary, intimidating process. We want you to feel like adding something to the web platform is a really great, high-value, high-leverage way to move the web forward. And finally, we want to make sure that we're moving forward quickly. So this is where I'm kind of in opposition with myself, and I have deep ruminations at night about how much I both hate and love myself because of this. But predictability wants to make sure we're moving forward responsibly and slowly where we need to and doing all of the right discipline. Ergonomics is kind of like, we need this now. We need to be working on these things. These are important. So that tension, again, like you've heard before, is intentional and natural. It'll make sure we don't get into any local maximum. Okay, that sounds great, right? Yep, show of hands, does that sound great? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we got some good hands. Cool, because if that doesn't sound great, well, I'll just leave, because that's what we're hoping for. So how are we going to get that? The biggest one is, right now, as you've seen from a few programs, is understanding. We want to be able to really know the problem space deeper than just a few ad hoc explorations or people who do a lot of web development on their own. So this quarter, one thing we're investing a lot in, we're working with UXR about this. The first is writing out developer personas. So some of you may have heard things like this for users before, and there actually are some that exist for developers as well. But there are things like the tinkerer or the hobbyist or the professional. We want to get a little more concrete than that, but it's essentially segmenting developers into groups so that we know where are they looking for feedback, where are they looking for guidance, how many lines of code on average do they write, what features do they tend to know about. If any of you play poker, it's kind of similar to once you know how aggressive someone is, you then know what cards they're probably playing at a given time. So we want to be able to say something like, what personas is this feature meant to target? And then that can help us reason through what kind of outreach you need to do, what kind of design. If something takes 20 lines, is that reasonable? Is that not reasonable? What concepts does it require leveraging? All of that. We then also want to develop what we call developer journeys, which again is taking it from user journeys. The idea is, what are problems web developers commonly ask themselves? And this is from the web developer's perspective. Something like, I want to chunk my code into a few different modules to load it more efficiently, or I need to render app-like UI, things on that level. And then once we have these developer journeys, we want to do some reference implementations where we get folks on the team to come up with, given the web platform of today, what is our guidance for the best way to do that? And so our hope then is these reference implementations will help show where things are falling down, and they'll also help in guiding developers to the best practices of today. All right, the last piece of what we're trying to do in the near term is offering more coordination and guidance to teams that are already working on ergonomics features. So we sent out a project survey. It had 2 responses as of last time I checked, so hopefully this will increase that number. I'll send the link out later. But we want to just get a sense of what everyone's working on and find the places where we can be helpful. This is more just trying to find places that want our help. We're happy to be plugging in there and doing what we can. We're also working on a proposal for something called API consultants. This is very similar to, some of you may have seen it, it's called the spec mentors, but it's people who will help you sort of move through all of the legalese required to get a spec sort of published and be a good citizen with all of the standards bodies. We want to expand that to, so you're new to the web platform and you want to understand what to do, we can help with the whole process, right? Working through the specs, working through API design, talking to architecture to make sure your design works well with our implementation and other implementations. I know Elliot has told me some of my ideas were stupid because Apple could never, ever, ever implement it because it's just like their architecture is completely incompatible with the idea. So those kind of insights we want to make sure are disseminated throughout the team. Then, and this one is probably a little more ambitious than the others, we want to develop persona channels, which are essentially ways, those developer personas we mentioned before, we want to have really easy communication channels with those developers. Maybe it's a Slack channel, maybe it's an emailing list, something where you can send your designs to the developers you think you're targeting and ask for feedback about whether or not the API shape is good, bad, what could be better, what problems are being missed, all of that. All right, so that's kind of the high level where we're going, the things we want to do. We also looked through some of the work that's been done or being done in the near term based on people's OKRs. And here are some of the big bets that we think are coming up. So we're doing a lot of work into games, for lack of a better word, but things like WebAssembly, shared array buffer, WebGL Next. There's a lot of really good like high performance computing things that are coming on the web. We're also working on streams and getting those used throughout the platform. Async rendering is a big push over this year. Houdini has been going on for a while and just continues to grow in importance and awesomeness. And scroll-linked effects. So this is the ability to essentially trigger animations or transitions or anything like that based on scroll position as well as units of time. So this should allow a lot of really common UX paradigms that now rely on main thread JavaScript to run sort of composited or through platform architecture. We're also looking into things like scalable loading. So how can you load quickly, responsibly, not take a lot of data? What virtual DOM? Question mark. There's a lot going on in this space. A lot of frameworks are adopting it. What kind of platform primitives should we take into account for this? I'm not saying we're going to do virtual DOM, but it seems like there's a use case here. HTML and JavaScript, aka JSX. This is something, again, that's gotten enormously popular. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to what the frameworks are doing and building that in where it makes sense, or at least having a coherent answer where it doesn't. And then, again, a lot of the hot trends, functional programming, one-way data flow. Is there anything we want to be doing in this space built into the platform to help make the frameworks and web developers run even faster at scale? All right. All of this relies on you guys. It's 1 p.m. and a dev who's currently in Sydney. So really no production work happens right now. We need folks who are interested in this space to come talk to us, to propose projects. If you want to help write reference implementations, if you want to dig into frameworks and sort of look at ways we could be learning from them, all of this. I will be bugging everyone in the future, but if you want to avoid being bugged, you could come find me proactively. But we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear what we could be doing. And hopefully we can get to a place where the web is awesome. Yeah. All right. Thanks.